Um, when Timothy Rubb first floated the idea of our collaboration by me to do this symposium jointly, we were wondering, well, should this just be an analysis of Johnson, or how should we structure this? And of course, we realized that Philadelphia during the Gilded Age and even before was a city that was, in essence, punching above its weight in collecting. And so we realized that broadening the symposium out to address the activities of other collectors was definitely the way to go. And our subsequent talks today will explore that. We'll start off with Yuriko Jackall, who holds MA degrees from the Courtauld Institute in London and the École du Louvre in Paris, and she received her PhD at the Université de Lyon in France under the supervision of Philippe Bordas. Yuriko is a specialist in 18th century French painting, focusing in particular on the art of Jean-Baptiste Greuze. Her manuscript on Greuze's expressive heads, or têtes d'expression, based on her doctoral dissertation, was awarded the 2016 Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art Prize and was selected for publication as a book in the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art's collection Comité des Travaux Historiques et Scientifiques. At the National Gallery of Art in Washington, where she has been an assistant curator of French painting since 2011, Yuriko has co-curated the exhibition Hubert Robert, 1733 to 1806, which was a reconsideration of France's preeminent painter of ruins and architecture, which opened at the Musée du Louvre in the winter of 2016 and at the National Gallery that summer. Yuriko was the sole curator of America Collects 18th Century French Painting, a survey of American taste for this art that brought together loans from 48 American museum collections across 25 states that was shown at the gallery in the summer of 2017. Her third exhibition there, Fragonard, the Fantasy Figures, is currently on view in Washington through December 3rd, so we better hurry up. Today, she will speak to us about one of the collectors highlighted in her America Collects catalog in her paper titled The French Connection, Joseph Bonaparte, Point Breeze, and Old Masters Come to Bordentown. Please give a warm welcome to Yuriko Jackall.
Thank you so much, Inga, and many thanks to you and Jenny Thompson for the invitation to speak here today. Let's see. Okay. The French diplomat Joseph Bonaparte holds the singular distinction of having been King of Naples and Sicily and King of Spain successively, and he is shown here in his first office in a portrait by Jean-Baptiste Vicard, an artist in the orbit of the neoclassical master Jacques-Louis David. Yet the achievement of the double kingship, if it may be called an achievement, pales alongside the even more dubious one of being the elder brother of Napoleon. And in the face of these two distinguishing facts, the third defining characteristic of Joseph's life has completely fallen by the wayside. Yet that is what I am here to discuss today. For Joseph lived in the United States on two occasions, from 1815 through 1832, and again from 1837 through 1839. To this, his adoptive country, he brought one of the most important private collections of art ever assembled: sculpture, decorative objects, antiquities, valuable books, and paintings, all housed in a sumptuous mansion built to resemble a European palace. Today, the mansion no longer exists, having been razed by a subsequent owner. But Joseph's lasting desire to share his passion for European, specifically French, culture played an important role in fostering a sense of art amongst denizens of the East Coast. In venturing into this terrain, I am drawing upon the work done by Dodge Thompson, Chief of Exhibitions at the National Gallery of Art, whose essay, When the 18th Century Was New, Joseph Bonaparte in America, was published earlier this year as part of the catalog of the exhibition America Collects 18th Century French Painting. Dodge was unable to be with us today, but I will do my best to represent his thoughts on the subject. I want to start with a brief summary of how Joseph, shown here in another official portrait by François Gérard as King of Spain this time, found himself in the United States, a Frenchman abroad in southern New Jersey, right near Philadelphia. Joseph, or Giuseppe Bonaparte, was born in 1768 in Corsica into a relatively affluent family of minor nobility. He was the eldest surviving child and one of 5 sons. Napoleon was born a year later, and the other boys, Lucien, Louis, and Jérôme, several years later. As a son, Joseph was afforded the rare opportunity to pursue advanced studies. Unlike Napoleon, who quickly showed promise as a military officer, eventually becoming the first Corsican to graduate from Paris's prestigious École Militaire, it was apparent that Joseph's talent lay in his ability to network and strategize with aplomb. Accordingly, he decided to train as a lawyer, following in the footsteps of his father, an attorney who had served as Corsica's representative to the court of Louis XVI in 1777. Joseph, too, began his career as a diplomat, serving on the Conseil de 500, the lower house of the French legislature, and in 1797 as French ambassador to Rome. It was this political savoir-faire that led to Joseph, not Napoleon, being initially considered as the rising head of the Bonaparte clan, particularly after the death of their father in 1785. In 1794, Joseph further cemented his authority thanks to his marriage to Julie Cléry, the daughter of the richest man in the French city of Marseille, shown here in her portrait by François Gérard, the same artist who painted Joseph in the representation as King of Spain. And the Julie Cléry portrait is now in the National Gallery of Art in Ireland. The union assured Joseph an unprecedented level of financial comfort and enabled him to develop the assured taste that would inform his collecting habits, starting with his purchase of a townhouse in Paris in the Rue de Rocher, and in 1798, the Château de Mortefontaine, shown in a 19th century engraving, and it is also visible behind Julie Cléry. She's shown sitting in the chateau with the park in the background. By 1800, however, Napoleon, now established as first consul of the Republic, had become the dominant force in the Bonaparte family, and Joseph and their brother Lucien were called upon to participate in a larger political match of chess. Following the French invasion of Sicily in 1806, Napoleon named his elder brother to the throne of Naples and Sicily. Joseph remained in Naples for 2 years before being displaced at his brother's behest, this time to become king of the country that Napoleon considered a, quote, bleeding ulcer, a constant drain of men, money, and morale. That is Spain. While Joseph had been fairly popular in Naples, having pursued a liberal agenda and public works programs, the Spanish experience proved, as may be imagined based on Napoleon's pithy description of the country, far more difficult. Despite his attempts to win over popular sentiment by initiating reforms such as the abolishment of the Spanish Inquisition, Joseph's foreign birth and political leanings ensured that he was never accepted as legitimate in this very conservative country. And this was reflected in the popular Spanish refrain that he was nothing more than a Pepe Botella, or Joe Bottle, a smear at his supposed heavy drinking. From a military standpoint, Joseph's control over the country also remained tenuous, with constant resistance offered by pro-Bourbon guerrillas. Although his brother sent in heavy reinforcements, he was unable to prevent declarations of independence from Mexico and Venezuela, respectively. Following a resounding drubbing by a British-led coalition at the Battle of Vitoria in 1813, Joseph abdicated and returned to France. And following that, after his brother's final defeat at Waterloo in 1815, Joseph fled Europe for the United States, leaving his wife and daughters behind in Paris. Aside from one return to Europe in 1832, when he went to London to personally plead for the legitimacy of a Bonaparte claim to the French throne, he remained in the United States, returning home definitively only in 1839, a mere 5 years before his death. Joseph's decision to seek refuge in this country was not in and of itself surprising. In 1800, he had, at his brother's request, presided over the signing of the Treaty of Mortefontaine, which formalized a durable agreement between the United States and France, settling recent hostilities waged in the Caribbean and calling for a firm and viable and universal peace and a true and sincere friendship between the two countries. The event, which united some of the leading American diplomats of the day, was held, as the name of the convention suggests, at Joseph's chateau, and it culminated with spectacular festivities that he organized in his sumptuous gardens to celebrate a new era of Franco-American friendship. In more trying times, as the Bonaparte dynasty became increasingly fragile, Joseph clearly thought of America as his best option for escape and plotted for an American future by acquiring tracts of land in upstate New York. His ultimate decision to base himself in the Philadelphia area appears to have been a thoughtful one. He quickly settled into a rented house at 260 South 9th Street, one that still exists today and is shown in the photograph. The following year, in July 2nd, 1816, he purchased a farm in Bordentown, New Jersey, 25 miles northeast of Philadelphia along the Delaware River. This was the estate that he would rebuild and transform into Point Breeze. And so I'm showing you also a map of the tract of land that he owned and that he continued to expand over the course of his ownership. This area was one known to welcome expatriates. In fact, Madame de Staël recommended it to Joseph because General Moreau, a former Napoleonic ally, had lived in a villa near the Delaware River close to Trenton during his own American exile between 1806 and 1813. Bordentown was moreover of particular appeal as the former home of Thomas Paine, author of The Rights of Man, a treatise that defended the French Revolution and appealed to the English to follow suit. In this area, generally receptive, therefore, to French culture and politics, Joseph sought to make his Point Breeze estate into the preeminent gathering place for French expatriates in America. Having arrived in this country with a fortune in hand, he also clearly saw this new domain as a venue in which to project his personal standing as new French royalty, although he tried to remain somewhat incognito by assuming the title of Count of Servilliers, after the name being taken after a small property he owned in France. He also sought more sentimentally to recreate on American soil an echo of his beloved Mortefontaine. The estate began as a plot of land measuring 212 acres. Between the time of purchase and 1835, he enlarged it with several more parcels of land. He also oversaw the landscaping of his new property so that the finished result boasted 10 miles of carriage paths, rare trees and plants, gazebos, fountains, and an artificial lake stocked with imported European swans. The lodging itself was similarly transformed into a mansion possessing a large wine cellar, floor-to-ceiling mirrors, elaborate crystal chandeliers, marble fireplaces, and grand staircases, a residence that was said to be the most impressive in the United States after the White House. To this splendid new home, Joseph also arranged to transport from Europe the majority of his art collection and household effects. In so doing, he placed on view what was essentially the finest art gallery of its kind in America, one that would serve to educate and influence generations of visitors and artists. What did this collection contain? As I mentioned at the outset, Joseph's holdings included an extensive library. He owned more books than were in the Library of Congress at that time, as well as decorative arts, antiquities, and sculpture. His more than 200 paintings, all faithfully inventoried by his private secretary, Louis Maillard, give us a clear impression of the variety and quality of his taste, so I will concentrate primarily on these in sketching the broad outlines of his collection. Given his background and family connections, it is not surprising to find that political affairs heavily influenced Joseph's collecting activities. Joseph owned the primary version of Jacques-Louis David's Napoleon Crossing the Alps. This iconic equestrian portrait was commissioned by the admiring King Charles IV of Spain for the newly created Hall of Captains in the Royal Palace of Madrid as a testament to the evolving relationship between France and Spain. David had been recommended for the job by Napoleon, and the result was an audacious piece of political propaganda. for in reality, Napoleon had crossed the Great St. Bernard Pass on a donkey, rather than the white steed that rears proudly in David's painted version of events. Joseph kept Napoleon crossing the Alps in Madrid for much of his Spanish reign. Its presence in Point Breeze was documented in 1817. Point Breeze also housed other pictorial allusions to Napoleon's military glory. Figures mounted on horseback in Napoleonic uniform by Jean-Louis Desmarnes and Jacques-François Swebac de Fontaine, both artists who had built their reputation on notable commissions from Napoleon, graced the billiard room. Another military series by Nicolas Didier Boguet glorified Napoleon's Italian campaign. This ensemble had been bestowed upon Joseph as a housewarming present following his acquisition of the Château de Mortefontaine, and it subsequently occupied pride of place in the dining room at Point Breeze. In a similar vein, we should cite the official and family portraits. Gerard's representation of Julie Cléry came to Point Breeze, as did his Joseph as King of Spain, and a version of his full-length portrait of Napoleon, which is shown in the center. The depiction of Napoleon was first publicly exhibited at the Pennsylvania Academy in 1819, the portrait of Joseph in 1824, and the portrait of Julie and her daughters in 1825. Other types of contemporary art were also well represented. For the most part, these contemporary paintings have been purchased in Paris or commissioned directly from living artists, many of whom Joseph knew and patronized. Jean-Joseph Xavier Bidot's Park at Mortefontaine, one of 6 paintings by the artist to accompany Joseph to Point Breeze, depicts the Bonaparte family group disembarking from a pleasure boat in the gardens of Mortefontaine. So you can see them just here. And this is a painting that's now in the Indianapolis Museum of Art. David's intimate double portrait of Joseph's daughters, Zénaïde and Charlotte, was made in 1821 when the artist and the Bonaparte sisters were political exiles in Brussels. The portrayal touches upon the models' close relationship to their father. They hold a letter from him bearing the telltale place of origin, Philadelphie, which, So the letter is obviously what they're holding here. This is a painting that's in the Getty Museum now, by the way. And when you see the painting in person, you can read Philadelphia marked as the return address, as well as Joseph's affectionate salutation to his daughters, mes chères petites amies. The work also suggests the patron's benevolent feelings towards David, who had given Charlotte drawing and painting lessons for several years while they were in Brussels, exiled together. Joseph's collection also included many fine examples of Old Master and earlier 18th century French painting, and these works provided a context for the kernel of Napoleonic art I've just discussed. Prominent works included Titian's violent historical scene, Tarquin and Lucretia, which had been commissioned by Philip II of Spain and is now in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. Here, the means of acquisition differ. Many of the French pictures in this group, the early 18th century French ones, which I'll get to in a moment, were acquired in the mass dispersals of aristocratic collections in Paris auctions after the Revolution. Some of the Spanish paintings were gifts for services and favors rendered to grandees sympathetic to France. It should be stated, though, that the majority of Joseph's finest masterpieces were spirited out of France under somewhat questionable circumstances in the course of his hasty retreat to Spain in 1813. In the course of his hasty retreat to France from Spain in 1813. In fact, in January 1808, when Joseph ascended to the Spanish throne, there were 1,100 paintings recorded in the royal palace in Madrid. In October 13, after his departure, only 381 remained. Moreover, this was not the first time he had behaved in this fashion. When he left Naples, it was said that he removed numerous valuables, leading to the local saying, "The king," that is Joseph, "arrived like a sovereign and left like a brigand. The queen," that is Julie Cléry, "arrived in rags and left like a sovereign." Mythological painting was well represented, and so these are the earlier 18th century French examples. Mythological painting was well represented with Natoire's The Toilet of Psyche, now in the New Orleans Museum of Art, and Coipel's The Abduction of Europa, which I'm sure you will all recognize as one of the crown jewels of this museum. And this is a painting that had been hailed as a sensation at the Paris Concours of 1727. Religious painting was also represented with, for instance, the now untraced Magdalene with Two Angels by Joseph Marie Vien, who was David's teacher. And Titian celebrated Magdalene, a painting that Joseph had removed from the royal monastery of the Escorial outside Madrid, and which later met its end in the London fire of 1873. A more intimate tone was struck with still lives, such as those by the Spanish Baroque painter Juan Sanchez Coton, now in San Diego and Chicago, respectively. Joseph also brought to Point Breeze at least 7 paintings by the French marine and topographical painter Claude Joseph Vernet, one of which was Vernet's exceptional depiction of Spanish diplomacy, Villa at Caprarola, documenting the visit of Elizabeth Farnese, Queen of Spain, to the Spanish ambassador's residence located in a family palace north of Rome. And again, this is a work now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art today. One of Joseph's friends, the lawyer Charles Ingersoll, wrote of him, I quote, "His manners were full of grace and elegance. His heart was full of humane feelings. His mind was well balanced, and all his views of life were moderate and cheerful. Wherever he was known, he was respected, and those who loved him once loved him always." Clearly, he was well thought of in this country, with Americans being ready to forgive the importation of art from Spain that subsequently has been considered more questionable. Guests at Point Breeze included John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, the Marquis de Lafayette, and Stéphane Girard, a French banker from Philadelphia who was then the richest man in the United States. For his part, Joseph never learned English properly, despite living in America for so long. But notwithstanding a constant sense of homesickness, he loved his time here. One event particularly impressed upon him what he considered a confirmation of American character and generosity. In January 1820, his house at Point Breeze was destroyed by fire. He later rebuilt it. He was away at the time, and his neighbors rushed in to save as many of his possessions as they could. Deeply touched, Joseph wrote, "Americans are without a doubt the happiest people I have ever known." Perhaps because of his lasting affection for his American friends, Joseph made a concerted effort to promote French culture in this country, thereby doing his part, as he considered it, in the improvement of knowledge and taste. For he quickly concluded that the American public did not have the cultural context to appreciate great European works of art, telling his brother Lucien at one point, one could not buy a Raphael for $100 or a Titian for $10,000. Accordingly, from 1818 onward, Joseph lent works from his collection to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, the country's first art academy and museum. In so doing, he accorded artists the opportunity to study masterworks that they might have known only through black and white prints, if at all. Thus, for instance, in 1822, he exhibited Napoleon crossing the Alps publicly at the Pennsylvania Academy, and he went on to land it a further 7 times before 1832. He also welcomed interested friends, neighbors, and sightseers from Philadelphia to view his collection in his home. It must be said that public response was mixed. The Italian and Spanish allegorical and religious paintings certainly inspired some measure of awe, but appear to have held little personal appeal for the solidly Quaker and Episcopalian gentry of Philadelphia. Referring to Coipel's Abduction of Europa and Natoire's Toilet of Psyche, 2 respectable Quaker ladies touring Point Breeze with Joseph recalled, I quote, "The walls were covered with oil paintings, principally of young females, with less clothing than their originals would have found agreeable in our cold climate, and much less than we found agreeable when the Count, that is Joseph, without ceremony led us in front of them and enumerated the beauties of the paintings with the air of an accomplished amateur." Joseph had better success with contemporary artists who welcomed the opportunity to study amongst his treasures. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the work of David seems to have most impressed these young artists, indicating that the turn towards neoclassicism that overtook French painting at the end of the Ancien Regime was not confined to Europe. Rembrandt Peale was deeply affected by David's sympathetic portrait of Joseph's daughters, employing its conceit for a portrait of his own daughters, Eleanor and Rosalba Peale, in 1826. So you can see the juxtaposition here. Thomas Sully managed to adopt David's Napoleon crossing the Alps seamlessly. The preeminent portrait painter in Philadelphia in the second quarter of the 19th century, Sully visited Bonaparte at Point Breeze, notably in May 1819, when he was engaged to restore Gerhard's full-length portrait of Napoleon in anticipation of a loan to the annual Pennsylvania Academy. In August 1819, he began work on his heroic depiction of George Washington crossing the Delaware, the most enduring history subject of the American Revolution. Sully successfully evoked the heroic scale and spirit of David's composition, and also referenced the way in which the neoclassical painter had pitted his hero against the vicissitudes of nature, as well as of human forces. Joseph carried some of his prize paintings back to Europe, including Gerhard's portraits of him as King of Spain and of Julie Cléry. But others remained in Point Breeze even after his final return to Europe. His eldest grandson, also named Joseph, inherited the Point Breeze estate and sold the contents in 2 spectacular auctions crowded with buyers, ensuring that many of Joseph's paintings would remain in this country. At the Bonaparte auction of 1845, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Arts acquired 4 of Joseph's Vernets, including Caprarola, now, as I said, in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Many objects from this remarkable collection remain untraced. However, major works of painting, sculpture, and furniture turn up nearly every year, or are discovered hidden in plain sight, as it were, conserved in public collections with their histories still unrecognized. When he returned definitively to Europe in 1839, Joseph left Coppel's Abduction of Europa, shown here, as a parting gift to one of his close American friends, the General Thomas Cadwallader, scion of a prominent Philadelphia family. With this gift, he left an affectionate parting letter that contained the following addendum. I quote, P.S. The Rape of Europa is one of the best paintings by Coppel of the French school of the last century. Perhaps, ever the skeptical Frenchman, Joseph was aware that American connoisseurship was not yet at a European level and wanted to make sure that his friend understood the true value of the gift. Or perhaps he was tacitly acknowledging that this major cultural icon, set adrift in the New World, would inevitably take on new meanings and new interpretations. Today, the work is a beloved member of the permanent collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and an ambassador for 18th century French painting and for Joseph's sure sense of taste. Thank you.